What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. In case you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres. We are coming to you live on YouTube like we do with most shows. YouTube.com/Oregon Football Max Torres is where you can find us. If you guys are here live on YouTube, hop in that live chat and let me know your reaction to the big news of the weekend following Oregon's 38-34 loss to the Oregon State Beavers. Make sure you let me know how you're feeling about that game. And then, of course, the big news that we're here to talk about that came almost immediately after that, Oregon offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham has been hired as the new head coach at Arizona State. That's obviously the big storyline for today. And we're going to get into that. Want to get some of your guys' thoughts and, any questions that you maybe have or comments. I want to try to get to as many of those as I can. Definitely just want to get into some reactions in this episode and some early thoughts, just kind of about where Oregon's at, what this can mean for Oregon, for the, long-term projection of the program. Maybe we'll get into a little bit of recruiting impact as well, because, we always like to talk about that. But yeah, just before we get into that, friendly reminder, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on all things Oregon Ducks, Oregon football recruiting. That is what we focus on here on the YouTube channel. And then you can find more of my written stories over at ducksdigest.com. So big news of the day this morning was Arizona State hiring offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham away from Oregon. We have a couple of statements that we can read here just off the top. First, coming from Arizona State, this is from Ray Anderson, the vice president for university athletics. I can actually share my screen here, so let me go ahead and do that. All right, here's the statement Sunday morning. We are proud to announce Kenny Dillingham as our head football coach. Coach Dillingham brings the energy, knowledge, and appreciation of our state and university that is valued by all of us. His knowledge of the current college football landscape, learned by coaching across the nation, is needed and wanted at ASU. He will care at the highest level about our state, our alumni, our former players, and every single group that is important to help us win. We look forward to working with him and all Sun Devils in making his staff successful and helping our program reach our goals. That, again, coming from Ray Anderson, vice president for university athletics at Arizona State. And then we have a statement from head coach Dan Lanning of the Oregon Ducks that we're going to read now, and then we'll get into breaking down the news. So Lanning said in a statement, quote, "Sophia and I couldn't be happier for Kenny and his wife, Bree, and their son, Ken, as he embarks on a new journey as head coach at Arizona State. Kenny did a phenomenal job this year for our program, and we are excited to see him chase his dream in his hometown. We are grateful for his efforts here and wish him nothing but the best in his future endeavors." Kind of interesting, just the lighting that they have on this picture of Dillingham. You have the yellow, and then he's kind of like faded out in black and white. It almost feels like it's like an in memoriam type of deal, but obviously that's not the case. Kenny Dillingham is very very much alive after being announced as the new head coach at Arizona State on Sunday. So let's go ahead and just kind of get into this story, this news. I'm in a beanie today because, as embarrassing as it is to say, it's kind of cold in my apartment in Long Beach. So that's why I'm all bundled up here. But I wanted to get on and talk about this news for Oregon. Man, this is definitely brutal. I think after Saturday's game went the way that it did, with just an absolute collapse in that second half, I think this news just adds insult to injury for Oregon. Seeing that things were looking so promising for Oregon, especially from an offensive standpoint, right? I think my first point I have here in my notes is that you go from the Mario Cristobal / Joe Moorhead offense last year, which was productive but not efficient, ground and pound. You go from that to an explosive offense, an efficient offense, one of the highest scoring offenses in the entire country at almost 40 points a game. And then now you're kind of back to square one. So Kenny Dillingham was a tremendous asset for Oregon, and he made Oregon offense in particular fun to watch again. I think that's one of the biggest things that is going to kind of be remembered from his very short stint in Eugene. Literally not even an entire year as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Oregon. Bringing in Bo Nix was obviously huge and instrumental for the success that Oregon was able to enjoy this year. So as great as Oregon's offense was, let's be honest, it wasn't a perfect year for them. There were times when there were some head scratching play calls. I'm looking at yesterday's game. You could even look at some the sweep with Troy Franklin on 4th down. I don't think Troy Franklin's run it all this year, but it doesn't seem like that 4th down was the right time to give him a carry. And then late in the game, when they were making that final drive, their last chance, their last attempt to go for a win, 3 straight run plays at the goal line with Jordan James, who isn't your lead back. I might add, Jordan James has had a pretty solid freshman season, but let's call it for what it is. He's the number 3 back on Oregon's team. So I don't know why he was getting those carries at the goal line. Even if he is, the bigger back, I feel like if your season, not your season, well, you could say your season was on the line, right? Because Oregon had to win this game to go play in the Pac-12 championship game. If your season, if that opportunity is on the line, you've got to go with your best back. And I'm pretty sure that that's Bucky Irving at this point in the season. So definitely some head scratching play calls there. And then on 4th down, that's when you decide to have Bo Nix roll out. I was shocked. I thought before that 4th down, and if I'm trying to scheme up a call, I was thinking put Bo in his element. Even though he's hurt, he obviously wasn't as hurt as he was in that Utah game. But put Bo in the position to succeed, have him roll out a little bit or like do a play action and have him run a little bit. And I'm fully aware that he was not able to run yesterday the way like he usually is able to. But I just feel like you're setting yourself up for failure with three consecutive run calls with the personnel that they had in the game. Granted, that pass to Troy Franklin was super, super close. I think it might have hit Franklin in the hands. I have to double check at the highlight and the photos that I've been able to see from our guy Scott. But I feel like it's just, Oregon felt like they were so close to taking that next step. They just needed to figure out what kind of pieces they could put in place to really get this offense humming. And Kenny Dillingham and Bo Nix were an instrumental part of that. So to go from the offense that we saw these last couple of years that was good enough to get it done, but you ultimately end up squeaking out a couple of really close wins against some pretty bad teams last year, to an offense that is able to rattle off points left and right, get a lot of different playmakers involved, put away games, win shootouts, mount comebacks. Those are all things that this offense was able to do under Kenny Dillingham. And then now he goes to Arizona State and an obvious homecoming. You guys know all the storylines there. Arizona State alumnus, Arizona native. He was getting super choked up and emotional during his intro press conference because this obviously means a lot to him. But Oregon's getting hit by the coaching carousel yet again. And this is obviously kind of salt in the wound for Oregon fans, seeing that they probably thought they were over the hump with this to a certain extent after Mario Cristobal left to return to his home in Miami as the head coach over there. Maybe they can take a little bit of solace in that. At least they're not Miami right now. Things are not going well for the Hurricanes, although it is, just the first year for Cristobal over there. But we don't need to talk too much about Miami. But yeah, now Oregon finds themselves looking for another OC for the second straight season. With Moorhead going to Akron last year amid the coaching transition. Now Kenny Dillingham's going to Arizona State. So Oregon's going to be able to get, I would imagine, some really solid interviews and, candidates for this job because it's the offensive coordinator position at Oregon. I mean, who isn't going to want that job? Dillingham showed that you can still, not that there was any doubt, but you can clearly attract a tremendous amount of talent to Oregon on the offensive side of the ball. I think that Oregon still has, a really solid season to showcase to recruits, to coaches. But this definitely creates a lot of pressure for Oregon and ultimately for Dan Lanning, because they had so much success, and now the expectation is going to be you're going to be able to hire somebody that is going to essentially be able to pick up right where Kenny Dillingham left off. And I think that's there's reason to be confident that Dan Lanning is going to be able to do that, because he's made some really solid hires. I mean, look at how great the offense was this year. He brought in Carlos Lachlan, and the running backs have done a great job. Junior Adams came over from Washington. The wide receivers have done a great job. So Drew Maringer with the tight ends, he's done a great job getting those guys involved and ready to go. And Adrian Clem on the offensive line. So there's reason to be very confident that Dan Lanning is going to be able to bring in a lot of really solid pieces, just in general from a coaching staff standpoint. And maybe now the question becomes, who does Kenny Dillingham take with him? Is he going to try to take any guys from this Oregon staff? That's another question that I honestly didn't really even think of until right now here on the show. So let's see, where can we go from here? I think obviously with Kenny Dillingham going to Arizona State as the former offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Oregon, you are asking yourself, well, the next biggest question, what's going to happen with Bo Nix? Is Bo Nix going to choose to stay another year? He does have another year of eligibility. Or is he going to give the NFL his best shot? And then even in the more immediate future, is he going to play in the bowl game? He did get asked following Saturday's game just kind of about his NFL future. And he said, quote, "The way college football goes is a lot of things change from season to season. So you can't worry about that until the season is kind of completed and finished. There's still some football left to play." So, good job by Bo there to, more or less avoid the question. But, now that the regular season's over, we're already seeing transfer portal craziness across college football. And now that Oregon isn't playing for a Pac-12 title, they're not going to end up in that great of a bowl. If USC is able to take care of their business, we're looking at the scenario now where USC could go to the college football playoff, and then I think it was Washington or Utah even could go to the Rose Bowl, and then Oregon's left with, the Alamo Bowl. I think some other bowls that I saw thrown out there were the Holiday Bowl or the Las Vegas Bowl. So just for how much potential and excitement this season had, I tweeted earlier today, Oregon's 9-3 finish in the regular season isn't that bad on the surface, but it's the fact that they could have gone just as easily. They could have gone 11-1. Because two of those losses came by a combined 7 points to Washington and to Oregon State. You lose to both of your rivals in the same year. It's just brutal. So it definitely stings for Oregon because the wheels fall off once again, just like last year. I think that the benefit now is, knock on wood, if you're an Oregon fan, that you're not gonna lose your head coach this time around, but you're still getting stung by the coaching carousel. And there was obviously a lot of smoke. Before there was obviously a lot of smoke around Kenny Dillingham taking this job throughout the whole season. Once Herm Edwards got fired in September, Kenny Dillingham's name was on those hot boards, was on those coaches to watch stories. So, it's not a huge surprise on the one hand, but now he's the youngest head coach in college football. So there's a lot of things to figure out here for Oregon now with whatever happens in the bowl season, managing personnel with the transfer portal window coming up, with early signing day coming up. But I'm getting a little bit all over the place. So let's talk a little bit more about Bo Nix. I mean, if I were to give my 2 cents, I feel like Kenny Dillingham being on the staff is obviously a major piece, a major loss for Oregon. And, whatever pitch they wanted to lay out for Bo to come back, they have to figure out what's going on along the offensive line. I'm sure that they're going to bring in some solid pieces along that offensive line. You maybe get some names out of the transfer portal there, but I feel like, Kenny Dillingham not being there is a major piece of continuity that Oregon can no longer offer. And, a hypothetical situation for Bo coming back. So, my 2 cents, I would probably think that Bo is that might have been Bo Nix's last game as a Duck. Seeing that, like I said, the bowl game isn't going to be that, we have to see what they get, but the bowl game it's not going to be a Rose Bowl. It's not going to be a college football playoff bowl. And, he's hurt too. He finished the season hurt. So you got to figure if he wants to give the NFL a shot, he doesn't want to have another opportunity. He doesn't want to take another chance on getting hurt, seeing that he messed up his ankle. So that's a tough deal in terms of figuring out what's going to go on with Bo. And then if Bo Nix does leave, then you're left, kind of trying to figure out the quarterback position for next year. You have Ty Thompson on the roster right now, Jay Butterfield on the roster. Dante Moore is signed in the class of 2023. So I'm trying to think of other notes that I can get to. Where do I want to go with this? So we're talking about the quarterback picture. And I think, again, with the quarterback picture for Oregon, it's another year of uncertainty, because we'd be in a totally different situation if Oregon had a recruit from the high school ranks that they had brought in that had played and, performed well and was slated to come back next year. So Oregon it seems like they're just, they're lacking continuity, and it's something that is so fickle in college football. I hope I'm using that word right, because I'm honestly not sure if I am, but there's so few programs in college football that actually have continuity. And, in today's era with the coaching carousel and NIL and the transfer portal, it's only getting that much harder to find consistency. And I think the programs that find consistency are the ones that are winning at a really high level, or their head coaches are just elite when it comes to managing, figuring out their roster, their coaching staff. You're looking at the Kirby Smarts, you're looking at the Nick Sabans, you're looking at Ryan Day, if you want to throw him in there, Jim Harbaugh. That Michigan-Ohio State game was nuts over the weekend, by the way. So that was definitely something to follow. But it's just another hurdle that Oregon is going to have to overcome in terms of just trying to find that consistency and that continuity from a coaching staff standpoint. But it's Dan Lanning's first year. I don't think that 9-3 is bad by any means. I think it's just, like I said earlier, the fact that it could have been 11-1, but they were shooting themselves in the foot. They were missing tackles. They were blowing opportunities. Both of those games, both of those losses against Washington and Oregon State down the stretch were so winnable. And I'm sure a lot of Oregon fans can definitely, back me up on that point. So I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place here, but we're going to go ahead and take a quick break for those listening on the podcasting platform. We'll be right back with more Oregon football talk on Kenny Dillingham's departure for ASU after this. Welcome back to the Duck Station Podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. We're talking about Arizona State hiring Oregon offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham. Got some folks here in the live chat. If you guys are here, thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder to hit that like and subscribe button for me. Let's see. We got some comments here, so I can try to get to some of those, and then we'll talk about some recruiting impact. Brooks says, I feel like this was Kenny's job for the taking. Phoenix native, alumni of ASU, and who knows if this job will open again for him. It had to be now or maybe never for him. We'll miss him, though. Silver lining is whoever the future OC is, he will have had to see how good this offense can be, and we must get it right for whoever takes the reins. Hopefully they stay more than a year. Yeah, I think that this year definitely showed whoever Oregon gets as their next offensive coordinator. Look at all this talent that we have to work with. Look at all these pieces that are in place. Definitely some younger players there like Troy Franklin that you get excited about, like Bucky Irving you get excited about. The tight end room. Oregon's offensive line is going to look a little bit different, but I think that they rotated in some pieces that give you confidence there. But like I said, again, with the transfer portal, you wonder, we don't know what's going to happen at Oregon. There are some names that we probably feel like, fairly confident could be on the move, but because of the transfer portal, maybe it becomes harder to sell a coach, an offensive coordinator candidate at, coming in to work with, this guy, because you don't know if he's going to be there, for example. So I think I agree with your point, Brooks. The silver lining is that, this offense can be really successful. But you got to go out there and find your guy. But yeah, it seemed like with Kenny Dillingham, even though that's another thing that I didn't get to mention. Back to your first point, you laid out all these factors, him being a Phoenix native, alum at ASU. I think one reason a lot of folks were thinking that this wouldn't happen, we don't know what's going to happen at ASU with regard to the NCAA investigation, right? There's no playbook for hosting recruits on campus in the midst of a global pandemic. Like, how do you have nothing you can turn to be like, oh yeah, this happened previously, so this is kind of the course of action we're going to take. But that's one of the big things that people are asking themselves now, or that's kind of up in the air. That was one of the reasons that maybe Oregon fans were thinking, oh no, he's not going to go, because you don't know what's going to happen at Arizona State with this investigation going on. So for all the factors that make sense, there's so much work that needs to be done at that program. But Kenny Dillingham's fired up for it, and he definitely seems like the right guy for them. He knows how to recruit. Obviously, with a lot of the playmakers that Oregon has in the fold for 23 with Dante Moore. We'll talk some more about Dante Moore later in the show. And yeah, he knows how to recruit. He's a young guy, young coach. He's relatable. He's from the state of Arizona. Arizona is one of the most talent-rich states out west. Definitely some solid quarterbacks coming from there. Oregon has a bunch of commits there in the 2023 class. I don't believe any of them are on the offensive side of the ball, but we can save that for when we get into some more recruiting talk. What else do we have here? Christopher says, in my opinion, tell Bo thanks and goodbye. This year was more about Dillingham's offense than Bo's ability as a quarterback. That's an interesting comment. I don't know. I think if you're Oregon, you definitely want Bo Nix to come back if you can. If he is willing to consider it, because while Bo's success was tied largely, I think, to Kenny Dillingham's impact as a play caller and in this offense, I think that he showed that he could take that step forward as a quarterback, to take better care of the ball, to take more calculated risks, knowing when to run, not just relying on his legs too much. It seemed like he was a much better passer this year, maybe than in years past at Auburn. So I think that, if you're Oregon, I think you'd be hard pressed to find an Oregon fan. Let me know in the comments. I feel like if you're an Oregon fan, you would happily take another year of Bo Nix to try to figure out the quarterback room a little bit more. But that's definitely an interesting comment. I think that the marriage, the reunion between Kenny Dillingham and Bo Nix is a huge reason that there was so much success this year, which I think is kind of what you were saying, but you're saying it's more so Dillingham's offense than Bo as a quarterback. So Bo Nix has been, phenomenal for so much of the year for Oregon. The wheels just kind of started to fall off in that Washington game, and his injury certainly didn't help. Renee said Tosh should be the next coach to go. Yeah, I've seen this take a lot on Twitter since yesterday's game, because let's be honest, the offense is not the reason that Oregon lost this game. It's because the defense allowed Oregon State to win this game while completing only 6 passes and pounding the rock at will. Oregon State finished with 268 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns, and averaged 6.2 yards per carry. And I understand the frustration. I don't think that firing Tosh is the way to go. I don't think parting ways with Tosh Lupoi is the way to go for Oregon. Because one of the points you have to consider, whether you're looking at, the defensive coordinator or the secondary coach, the linebackers coach, or even Dan Lanning, across the board, these coaches naturally because there's no other way to go about it. These coaches naturally inherited players that they didn't recruit to Oregon to an extent. And that's going to happen at any school you go to. This is not a situation that's unique to Oregon. But the point I'm trying to make is I think we could see some improvement from this defense next year once more of the coaching staff's players come to Oregon. And maybe they fit the scheme a little bit better than some of the guys on the roster currently. And another point that kind of goes out there is you can't fire away your problems. And I think that, just one season might be a little bit too short of a leash. So I think that Tosh has done a good job, during his career, working with the defense. I think this is I need to double check that if this is his first year as a defensive coordinator. That's on me for not knowing that. But I think the recruiting upside with Tosh Lupoi is absolutely paying off. You saw the Johnny Bowens commitment last week. That was my most recent episode of the podcast, is the trio of commits that Oregon landed kind of over the holiday window. So go give that a listen, go give that a watch if you haven't already. But I wouldn't be in the boat of saying that Tosh should be the next coach to go. That's not my opinion. All right, let's see. Raymond says, I wouldn't begrudge Bo leaving, but it is more than disappointing to lose the OC after less than one season. It feels like if he could have stayed like Lanning did with Georgia. Yeah, I think, the reason that I think this is so upsetting from an Oregon perspective is that the offense was explosive again. This is what a lot of, at least when I started following Oregon, their offense was like totally unstoppable. That breakneck pace, the hurry up tempo with Chip Kelly, your LaMichael James, your Marcus Mariota, Kenyon Barner, DeAnthony Thomas kind of guys. It felt like this year that Oregon got back to that to some extent, and that they're recruiting guys that can help bring them back to that. And then now Dillingham leaves to Arizona State, and you're left with this cloud of uncertainty around the offense, not only from an offensive coordinator standpoint, but now obviously from a personnel standpoint, because you don't know who's going to leave and who's going to remain at Oregon. We don't know what next year's team is going to look like because we have to get through the offseason. So I think that, after one season, it's just the, it's just the modern era of college football. So you got to get used to it. Hazmat says, play calling, boo. Yeah, definitely some questionable play calls in that game. And that's a huge reason that this loss goes on the coaching staff. This loss is completely on the coaching staff. Definitely some head-scratching play calls. 0 for 5 on fourth down. What was the other number? So it was 0 for 5 on fourth down for Oregon and 5 for 14 on third downs, which is so interesting because, like I said, the offense wasn't the problem. You scored enough to beat Oregon State in this game. But, yeah, they weren't really necessarily able to sustain some of these drives when you look at the 5 for 14 third down conversion stat. But that doesn't tell the whole story. So even though there were some very questionable play calls, I thought they were getting way too cute with the screens. That's something that has emerged a lot this season. But there were some screen calls that worked. There were some that just got completely blown up. And, it's a tough scene for the Ducks. The play calling there's been some great games. There's been, and the play calling has been very head scratching in some of the losses. You look at that Washington game and Bo Nix's run on third down where he ended up eventually getting hurt. And you just kind of, you can't help but ask yourself, what would this season look like if Bo didn't get hurt, right? I think that I've seen on my timeline on Twitter quite a bit. Follow me on Twitter at mtorresports if you haven't already. And some people are saying this team is 11-1 with a healthy Bo, and I'll die on that hill. And that may be the case. But when you have a quarterback that's injured, you lose that margin for error with poor play calling because you can't rely on Bo to make up for it when you call the wrong play and he can't dance his way out of trouble because he has no mobility. So yeah, the play calling was certainly not a strong suit, especially when Oregon State was coming back in this game. when Oregon State outscored Oregon 21-3 to end that game in the fourth quarter. That is, can't have bad play calls when you really need to be putting up points. No duh, right? Ruben said, "What's up, Max? I love the show. Let's get an OC that wants to be here." That's another thing too that's an interesting point that you mentioned, Ruben. I don't know if you guys were in Twitter Spaces at all. I hopped in Twitter Spaces yesterday. So I hopped in Twitter Spaces yesterday, and oh my word, was it toxic? Some people were saying, one person said, I love Dillingham, and I'm paraphrasing. I love Dillingham, love Lanning, but like let's stop bringing coaches here that have dream jobs. I think is kind of paraphrasing what he said. And I don't know. I think that from a head coaching perspective, I can understand that take a bit more, because obviously with Mario and with Willie, they both had jobs in Florida that were kind of looming large. But from a coordinator standpoint, I feel like you kind of have to take that risk a little bit more. So it's tough. It's really tough to find a guy that's going to want to be there long term, because you bring a guy there and he can sign a contract or whatever, but these new jobs open up, and there's not a whole lot you could do. Apollo says, "No, stop it. Let Dan and Tosh get their players in the program." That's what I was saying. And this is another thing too, Christopher. I feel like I've kind of said this before, and I feel like I don't really know. This is an ongoing discussion. Christopher says, "I guess I'm saying I'm tired of 1-year rentals, and instead I'd rather have a developed quarterback that we can have for years, i.e. Marcus, Herbie, Dixon, etc., etc." Because this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit from a quarterback standpoint. I think, and one of my buddies told me, if you have that 1-year guy that can come in and just light up your offense, which Bo did this year, I think if Bo, let's just go best case scenario, if Bo Nix comes to Oregon, they go to the playoff or they go to the Rose Bowl, heck, they win a national championship. How does this positioning change? Because I think that for Oregon to get out of the 1-year rental, so to speak, quarterback approach, I think that is healthy for the program. If you can go to the prep guys and develop a multi-year starter, I think that most of us can agree that is the healthier approach for Oregon right now. But look at Oregon's championship window. The talent on offense was certainly there for Oregon, I think, this year. The questions were really on defense. Was Oregon's defense going to do enough to keep them in games? Oregon's defense going to win them games? I mean, that obviously happened in the Utah game, so we have to give them their credit. We can't say that they were a complete liability all season, because they kept them in that Utah game and ultimately won them that game. But where was I going with that? I think if Oregon's able to win a national championship with Bo Nix, even just for a year, I think that changes the perspective. But Oregon's national championship window is such an interesting topic to continue tracking, because if you can get that guy that's the right fit, and he can light up your offense and just take you places you haven't been in a while, I think that really changes the conversation here. And if you do go to a guy that you're developing that's there for multiple years, you're going to end up taking your lumps more than likely. Not every young quarterback that plays at the college level is going to be Trevor Lawrence, is going to be a Bryce Young. But Bryce Young didn't even start right away. So it's tough. I think Oregon kind of finds themselves in a little bit of a rut in terms of finding that right moment to not go the transfer route. But another point I want to say here on the topic of the transfer quarterbacks, if you look at the play of Ty Thompson this year, of Jay Butterfield, the very limited times that they've kind of gone in, you would have taken a transfer quarterback too, right? I think when Bo Nix initially committed to Oregon, I was a little bit shocked because, it was Bo Nix from Auburn, right? You had all the storylines, but then there were more things that made sense, the Kenny Dillingham reunion, what have you. Oregon had to get a quarterback out of the transfer portal because nobody else on the team had played any college football. So they kind of had their hand forced at that point. But I think this is a super interesting point, Christopher, and I'm going to continue to track it. And that's like a huge, huge point for Oregon football right now. Is just how do you approach the quarterback position? All right, what else do we have? Timonacci says definitely want Bo Nix back. All right, let's talk here. Let's talk about Sean's comment, and then I think I'll probably wrap the show after that. So Sean said, I don't see Dante Moore coming here anymore. Thoughts? And I've seen some comments here referencing an interview that Dante did over the weekend. I think it was after his last high school football game. I think he won another state title. And I was watching parts of it. I didn't watch the entire interview, admittedly, but the part where he talked about Oregon, this was after the news had, I think, already the reports had started to surface about Dillingham and Arizona State, and he was talking about one of his teammates, like, he's going to his place, and I'm going to Oregon. It would have been great to team up at the next level. And then the reporter was like, "Oh, you're going to Oregon?" And like kind of implied the question about like, "Are you still going to Oregon with Kenny Dillingham going to Arizona State?" But he did not ask that word for word. And in my opinion, I don't think watching that interview was enough to confidently say Dante Moore knew at the time about Kenny Dillingham going to Arizona State. And that short little interview is enough to say, okay, he's still locked in. Like, he's still locked in, still confident with Dante Moore going to Oregon. I don't think, for me, that little interview snippet that I saw and that was making the rounds was enough to confidently say that. So, but before all that happened, Dante Moore was, I think that the feeling inside Oregon from the people that I had talked to was there was not that much worry at all that Dante Moore was going to be flipping. But the offensive coordinator, his future position coach, is no longer at Oregon. So obviously that creates a ton of uncertainty. And, this obviously comes on the heels of him saying that he's locked in with Oregon. I think it was just the week prior. But this obviously is going to create a ton of uncertainty for Oregon when it comes to recruiting. And priority number one has to be getting Dante on the phone, saying, we're going to get an awesome offensive coordinator in here. Obviously, you want to maybe even go as far as running some names by him. I don't think that you want to let one recruit dictate who you're going to bring in as your offensive coordinator. I think that would be pretty insane to, latch a major hire in your program to one recruit. But it's no secret that whoever Oregon brings in as their offensive coordinator is going to play some kind of a role in Dante Moore's decision whether to ultimately go to Oregon or not go to Oregon. So I think it's too soon to say if, I don't want to, make a prediction of whether I think Dante Moore is going to go to Oregon or isn't going to go to Oregon. I think it's too soon. We have to see what's going to unfold here. So hopefully nobody goes out there putting words in my mouth, but I think that we have to see what happens here. What other fallout stems from Kenny Dillingham going to Arizona State to be the new head coach. But obviously Dante Moore is the name to monitor now in Oregon recruiting because he's the class headliner. And for Oregon, maybe more than any other program in the country, they need to nail the quarterback spot. Right now with Dante Moore in the fold, I think it's nailed, right? He's 5-star prospect, can do it all, named the SI All-American Elite 11 MVP. But in the case that they lose a commitment from Dante Moore, things get very, very interesting. You saw how Notre Dame handled their quarterback recruiting. They were the favorites for Dante Moore at one point. And then I thought there was some time when there was, Michigan had some really good buzz as an in-state school. Michigan still doesn't have a 2023 quarterback as of right now. I'm double checking that right now, but they would be a school to maybe monitor now with this uncertainty after the news of Kenny Dillingham's departure. So Oregon, until Bo Nix got to Oregon, I feel like they were kind of that school that fell into that designation of being one quarterback away. I think Oregon fell into that designation. And to be a school that's one quarterback away, we clearly know just because you're one quarterback away and you get that quarterback to your team, if that quarterback gets hurt, then you're no longer one quarterback away. So maybe Oregon's really two quarterbacks away, because not only do you need a solid starter, what do you need behind him? You need solid depth that can come right in and not miss a beat. And it's very clear that Oregon does not have that right now. Not trying to criticize or slight any of the quarterbacks in that room, but based on what we've seen this year, the quarterback play, aside from Bo Nix, is not where it needs to be. And I think that the Oregon staff would acknowledge that if they're, having those meetings behind closed doors and talking about that. Maybe they wouldn't say it publicly, but, if you've been watching this team, you know that the quarterback play is not where it needs to be, because Bo Nix got hurt and bad things happened. Let's just put it that way. So Dante Moore is the biggest guy that you have to track now on the recruiting trail for Oregon, following the news of Kenny Dillingham's departure to Arizona State. And then, that was the other thing that I wanted to check. If Oregon has any offensive commits out of Arizona in 23, I don't think they do. Okay, let's see here. I'm looking at this. Okay, you got Cole Martin, who's a corner, Amari Washington, who's a defensive lineman, and then you also have Michael Gardner out of Arizona. Okay, so yeah, that's a good thing, I think, for Oregon. But, I think that you have to check in on some of these other recruits in the 2023 class to see, how does this move maybe change things for them? I think the timing of this is obviously pretty tough for Oregon, seeing that we're less than a month away from the early signing period. So they're going to have to move fast. Dan Lanning's going to have to move fast, but at the same time, just like we said last year when Oregon was in the head coaching search, right? You can't rush a hire for one recruiting class. You cannot rush a hire for the sake of one recruiting class, because one recruiting class is more than likely, except in maybe some very unique situations, one recruiting class is not going to win you a national championship. Is this 2023 recruiting class really crucial for this staff? Absolutely. Particularly on the defensive side of the ball? Absolutely. But with how everything is gone, with it being Dan Lanning's first year as a head coach, I would think that he knows he can't rush this hire. So I'm going to try to do some digging and see what kind of names I can maybe think about. I spoke with Jurion Dickey last week, or earlier this week, depending on how you want to look at it. Sunday is like technically the start of a new week, but I spoke with Jurion Dickey this week. And as far as, his signing timeline and, where he's at with Oregon, he said when I talked to him that he was 100% committed, and he has a ton of faith in Oregon. Doesn't look like he's going to be enrolling early, at least not in the winter. If anything, he said it was going to be in the spring, that he was kind of 50-50 on doing an early enrolling in the spring. And then it was more so looking like he was probably going to sign his national letter of intent in February. That's kind of a tongue twister, February, if you look at the spelling. So those are that's kind of just some of what I had on some of the top commits in Oregon's class. But it's going to be very, very interesting to see what ultimately happens with this 2023 recruiting class. So I definitely wanted to talk on Dante Moore because, like I said, from that short snippet, that short video, I'm not sure that you can deduce that he was necessarily aware of the Kenny, unless he was asked, hey, look, Kenny Dillingham is not at Arizona State anymore. Are you still going to Oregon? And he said yes. Then an answer like that would give me more confidence. So maybe I didn't see all of the interview that I needed to, but from that little snippet where he said I'm going to Oregon, when that reporter was asking him, I just don't know if the timing was necessarily right where it needed to be. So we'll have to keep, case in point, I think it's too early to say one way or another. Until pen meets paper, you got to see what's going to happen with recruits like Dante Moore and anybody else in the class. So a lot of good stuff there. So I wanted to get on here and, get an episode in. I got to get to the gym and get a workout in. So I'm going to go ahead and chop up this podcast and then get it uploaded. But we're going to have plenty to talk about here with, the as we kind of get our way into the offseason with only the bowl game remaining for Oregon. So got a bunch of people here live. If you guys got in here late, make sure to go back and listen and watch the rest of the episode. Do me a favor, like, subscribe, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, family, other Duck fans. And until next time, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.